By the time Catherine Larson reached the back stair with a pail of coal, her wrists were shaking so badly that black dust spilled over the rim and patterned her skirt like bruises. The kitchen fire had burned low after supper, and Lady Harwood had sent up fresh guests for cards and negus and warm rooms, which meant every servant not quick enough to look occupied was suddenly indispensable. She balanced the pail against her hip and climbed anyway. At the turn of the stair, Lady Harwood's maid, Miss Tripp, looked down her narrow nose and stepped aside only at the last possible instant. "Mind the carpet," she said. "Plain girls ought at least to be useful." Catherine did not answer. She never did, unless an answer was required to keep the peace. She dipped her head, passed, and carried the coal toward the withdrawing room where laughter spilled from behind closed doors in warm, careless bursts. At 22 she had already learned how quickly speech could be used against a woman with no fortune she could immediately prove, and no brother to raise his voice over hers. She had her father's dark hair and his level gaze, but grief and poor meals had hollowed her cheeks, and Lady Harwood called her severe as if severity were a moral fault. Once, years ago, this house in Hampshire had been called hers, in the easy way fathers call future things certain. Then her father died of a fever that took him in 10 days, and certainty died with him. Lady Harwood, widowed from her first husband before she married Mr. Larson, kept the house, the invitations, and the social authority. Catherine kept the work no one thanked, accounts by candlelight after midnight, inventories before dawn, errands in rain, apologising for shortages she had not caused, signing notes she was not permitted to read in full. She was not precisely a servant, and not any more treated as family. She was an unwelcome dependent, useful enough to keep and too inconvenient to acknowledge. In the small, still hours, when even the mice in the scullery seemed to sleep, she took private comfort in the one discipline no one could strip from her. Her father had taught her penmanship until each line sat straight as pinned ribbon, taught her French verbs while walking the orchard paths, taught her to read ledgers not as columns of ink, but as promises made and kept. Wheat in, rent out, repairs deferred, seed purchased, debts carried, each mark had consequence. "Figures tell the truth when people cannot afford to," he had told her once, tapping the page with his forefinger. "Never turn away from them, Cat." So she did not. She copied household books in a careful hand by a single taper, while above her Lady Harwood entertained men who praised her wit and lost money she did not have. She endured Miss Tripp's little humiliations, the butler's studied indifference, the cook's wary pity, and the occasional public correction delivered for company amusement. When Lady Harwood called her ungrateful and bloodless, because Catherine had declined to laugh at a joke made at her expense, Catherine felt one hot tear break free. She wiped it with her wrist before anyone could claim it as drama, and returned to adding columns under the wavering light. Silence kept her fed. Silence kept her housed. Silence, she had learned, was less dangerous than truth spoken at the wrong table. On the night everything shifted, the card party ran late and loud. Carriages had not stopped arriving until near 11, and the stables were a confusion of lamps and shouting boys. Catherine finished balancing the silver account and carried the keyring back to the pantry, then finally escaped to the narrow room she occupied near the old nursery wing, where damp crept under the window frame and no one came unless they needed something done. She had just unlaced her stays when the crash came, not from the front drive, not from the kitchen yard, from the old orangery at the east end of the house, abandoned these 5 years after a storm split half the glass, and Lady Harwood declared repairs a vulgar expense. The sound was wrong for wind, sharp, heavy, followed by the clatter of falling panes. Catherine stood still for one breath, too, listening. The house above and below remained asleep in the thick post-midnight way of overfed people certain that walls and money will protect them. Somewhere a guest snored. A clock ticked. Then she took up the one candlestick she kept and slipped into the passage. The corridor to the orangery smelled of dust and old citron wood. Her candle guttered once in the draught. At the broken doorway she raised the light and saw him. A man lay twisted among jagged glass and split wooden frames, one shoulder jammed against a stone planter. His coat, good wool, dark, finely cut, was soaked through at the side. Blood had pooled and turned nearly black in shadow. When he heard her step, he tried to rise, failed, and made a rough sound through his teeth. "Don't!" Catherine said before she could think better of it. She set the candle on a ledge and knelt, skirts crackling against glass. "You'll bleed worse." He had a young face under the dirt and blood, perhaps no more than 30, though fever had already sharpened him. His eyes found hers with painful focus. "Guards!" he whispered. "Road. They saw—" He coughed. "Are you alone?" Yes. She should have gone for the butler. Yes, she should have rung for help and let the house decide what to do with an injured stranger who might be criminal, traitor, or merely unlucky. She knew all this in one clear rush, but she also knew the butler would summon Lady Harwood, and Lady Harwood would summon whichever side paid best. She knew that men in uniform searching a private house at night rarely asked gentle questions of women without standing. She knew, with the same old certainty she used for ledgers, that hesitation would choose for her. "I am now," she said. "Can you stand if I help?" He gave a breath that might have been a laugh and nodded once. It took all her strength and most of her patience. He was taller than she by half a head, and half conscious besides, but desperation lends method. She got his arm over her shoulder, dragged him through the side door, and took not the servant corridor, too exposed, but the disused nursery passage her father had shown her as a child, used once for moving trunks and nursemaids unseen. At the end stood a broad linen press built into the wall, empty now except for broken nursery toys and old trunk straps. Catherine kicked out the straps, shoved the toys aside, and manoeuvred him in behind folded, moth-eaten blankets. "If anyone opens this," he began. "They won't," she said. "Not if I can help it." A pounding came from below, the rear entrance. He caught her sleeve with startling strength. "If I die before dawn," he said, words slurring at the edges. "Burn the papers. Sewn in my lining. Don't read them. Burn. Who are you?" He looked at her, as if deciding whether names were a luxury. "Adrian," he said finally. "Lord Adrian Vale." The name struck faintly familiar from newspapers left in the library. Younger brother to the Duke of Wexford, known for military service and occasional scandal in equal measure. Catherine had no time to sort rumour from reality. Boots thudded in the hall. Male voices. The butler's clipped tone, then another rougher one. Parish authority trying on importance. Catherine shut the linen press, straightened her sleeves, and moved to meet them halfway down the passage, heart slamming so hard she feared it might show through her bodice. 2 constables stood at the turn, hats damp with mist, lantern light throwing their shadows long and warped across the wallpaper. Behind them came Harwood House's butler, Mr. Fenwick, expression pinched with outrage at disruption. "We heard a disturbance," the taller constable said. "Glass breaking. Seen anyone pass this way?" Catherine lifted the candlestick so the flame did not shake. "Only rats and wind," she said, and made herself sound mildly annoyed. "The orangery panes have been loose for years. If you search every draught in Hampshire tonight, you'll freeze before dawn." Fenwick frowned. "Miss Larson, perhaps the gentleman should inspect." "By all means," she said, cutting him off with a politeness he could not publicly rebuke. "You may inspect broken pots and dead orange trees to your heart's content. But Lady Harwood has half the county asleep under this roof. If you wake her guests chasing phantom burglars, you may answer to her yourself." The shorter constable grimaced. No man wanted Lady Harwood's temper at 1 in the morning. After a moment they exchanged a glance and turned towards the orangery with Fenwick muttering behind them. Catherine waited, counting silently to 100 as if totalling a column. They returned, frustrated and cold, with nothing to show but wet boots and a cut hand from glass. "Nothing there," the taller man said. "Precisely," Catherine replied. When they finally left by the rear door, she leaned one hand against the wall and allowed herself 3 shaking breaths before returning upstairs. The next hours passed in fragments, boiling water in secret, tearing old shifts for bandages, forcing bitter willow bark tea between clenched teeth, while Adrian drifted in and out of fever. He was articulate even in pain, once apologising for bleeding on her floorboards in a tone of absurd courtesy. Near dawn, his skin cooled enough that panic receded. By sunrise, mist lay low across the kitchen yard. A stable boy shouted somewhere beyond the wall. Adrian stood, pale but upright, in a borrowed workman's coat she had stolen from the laundry basket. At the door he pressed something into her hand, a heavy signet ring, lion crest worn smooth at the edges. "For proof," he said. "I need no proof," Catherine answered, startled by my sudden anger. "I need this night forgotten." A bitter smile touched his mouth. "My brother won't believe it," he said, "that I was saved by a woman no one sees." Then he was gone, slipping through the yard gate before full light made faces legible. Catherine stood in the chill, with the ring cold in her palm, until the kitchen bell rang, and ordinary cruelty resumed. By afternoon, ordinary had turned vicious. Word travelled fast when uniforms had been involved. Someone in the village had seen constables at Harwood House. Someone had told someone at market. By luncheon, Lady Harwood had transformed rumour into accusation with practised ease. "You have brought disgrace under my roof," she declared in the morning room before 2 visiting ladies and Mr. Fenwick, ensuring witnesses. "Men searching in the night and in your wing. Shall I pretend I do not understand the sort of invitations that produces?" Catherine kept her hands folded to hide that they were clenched. "No invitations were sent by me." "Do not take that tone." Lady Harwood's rings flashed as she snapped shut her fan. "I have tolerated your ingratitude beyond reason. Perhaps gratitude can be taught." The 2 ladies pretended deep interest in their tea. Lady Harwood turned to Fenwick. "Send word to Mr. Bellamy that I would welcome a call tomorrow." Catherine felt the room tilt, then steady. Mr. Bellamy was a widower of 50 with a red face, a heavy laugh, and fingers always damp with port. He had once pinched Catherine's elbow hard enough to bruise when praising her good practical build. "No," Catherine said quietly. Lady Harwood smiled without warmth. "My dear, this is not a request. Mr. Bellamy has expressed admiration and a willingness to settle obligations with uncommon generosity. You should be thankful your errors may yet prove useful. Gaming debts, then." Catherine had suspected their scale from unexplained withdrawals and vanished silver, but hearing herself appraised against them made something cold and bright enter her chest. That evening she went to the estate office under pretence of retrieving sealing wax, and found Mr. Fenwick and the steward bent over ledgers, not usually opened in company. At her step they shut the book too quickly. "Miss Larson," the steward said, all oily courtesy, Need something?" "Only wax," she replied, and saw, before the ledger closed completely, her father's estate column with figures altered in fresher ink than the rest. 2 days later, the Duke of Wexford arrived. No trumpet announced him, only the crunch of wheels in the gravel and the sudden electricity of servants who understood rank better than weather. Catherine watched from the upper landing as a tall man in dark travelling clothes stepped from a plain carriage with no crest displayed. He moved with controlled economy, as if every gesture had been considered in advance and stripped of waste. His face was composed to the point of severity. His eyes, when he lifted them to the house, were pale and unreadable. Winterstone, she thought absurdly, though it was June. Lady Harwood received him in silk and astonishment. Half an hour later, Fenwick appeared at the schoolroom door where Catherine was mending account pages, and informed her, with disapproval barely disguised as propriety, that His Grace wished to ask her a few clarifying questions. In the library, the Duke did not offer a seat. He did not offer discourtesy either. He merely occupied the room as if warmth were irrelevant. "Miss Larson," he said. His voice was low, precise. "On the night of the 12th, 2 constables searched this property. You encountered them." "Yes." "You also encountered my brother." Catherine's pulse kicked once, hard. "I did." He studied her for a beat that felt like measurement. Then he drew Adrian's signet from his pocket and set it on the desk between them. "He told me everything." Relief should have followed. Instead, apprehension deepened. "Everything from whose mouth and in what shape?" "I did what any decent person would," she said. "Would they?" The question was not mocking, it was almost clinical. "My brother reports considerable personal risk." "Your brother was bleeding in broken glass," Catherine replied before caution could stop her. Risk was already present. Something shifted behind his composure, perhaps surprise quickly hidden. He asked for details, where Adrian had entered, how long he stayed, whether he spoke names, whether anyone else knew. Each answer seemed to satisfy and yet not satisfy, as if he were testing joints for weakness in a structure he might have to trust. At last he said, "You have my gratitude, Miss Larson." The words were correct, the tone stripped bare of sentiment. From an inner pocket he produced a leather purse and placed it beside the ring. "For your trouble." For one suspended moment Catherine stared at the purse. Payment, neat, final, convenient. The price of being useful and forgettable. "I am not in service to you, Your Grace," she said, careful and cool. "Nor did I risk scandal for hire." A flicker, irritation or respect, she could not tell, crossed his face. He took the purse back without argument. "As you wish." When she left the library, 2 footmen looked studiously away, and Miss Tripps stared openly, avid for signs of guilt. That night, passing the half-open estate office, Catherine heard Lady Harwood's voice, low and urgent. "Do it now, before he returns to question her alone again." The steward answered, "If the books are adjusted, she can be blamed for discrepancies by week's end." Lady Harwood, "Precisely. Embezzlement, instability, whatever sounds respectable. I want her gone before she ruins me with one of her righteous speeches." Catherine moved on without a sound, spine straight, face calm, heart pounding like a fist against a locked door. If she married Bellamy, she would disappear into his house and his debts, and no one would ask after missing sums again. If she refused, they would brand her thief and cast her out before she could speak to anyone who mattered. If she stayed silent, her father's name would be written over in fresh ink by hands that had already begun. In her room, she set Adrian's signet on the table and looked at it until the candle burned low. Silence had kept her fed. It might yet bury her. Silence might yet bury her. Catherine sat until the candle bent and guttered into its own wax, the signet ring a dark coin of consequence at her elbow. Below, somewhere deep in the house, a door shut and a servant laughed too loudly, then remembered himself and went quiet. Harwood House always settled badly after midnight, as if the walls absorbed every false word spoken in the drawing-room and exhaled them back into the passages before dawn. She rose, wrapped the ring in a scrap of linen, and stitched it into the hem of her plainest petticoat with tiny furious stitches. If Lady Harwood meant to accuse her, she would need something more than outrage to survive it. At first light she was in the still-room sorting receipts into bundles by quarter year, an ordinary task done with ordinary hands, while her mind moved elsewhere. Mr. Fenwick passed twice, each time pausing just long enough to confirm she remained where she ought. Miss Tripp entered on no pretext at all, sniffed at the vinegar bottles, and remarked that some women mistake stubbornness for virtue. Catherine answered with silence and labelled another packet. By 8 the house had begun its performance of respectability. Fires relit, polished silver, breakfast trays carried upstairs to guests who had called servants vulgar names 6 hours before. Lady Harwood rang for chocolate and dictated invitations in a mellow tone that never reached her eyes. At 10 she summoned Catherine to the morning-room. Mr. Bellamy was already there. He stood before the hearth in a bottle-green coat, strained at the middle, thumbs hooked in his waistcoat, red cheeks shining from either drink or heat. When Catherine entered, his gaze slid over her with proprietary amusement. "Ah," he said, "our serious little accountant." Lady Harwood did not invite Catherine to sit. "Mr. Bellamy has renewed his generous offer. Given recent disturbances, I have advised that haste would be wise for all concerned." Catherine kept her chin level. "What disturbances, precisely?" Lady Harwood's smile thinned. "Must we be tedious? Men searching the grounds, secret interviews with dukes in libraries, whispering servants, your judgment is plainly compromised." "My judgment kept this household from scandal 2 nights ago." Mr. Bellamy chuckled. "A spirited one, Harwood. I like a bit of spirit." "Can be trained out." Catherine looked at him until his grin faltered. "I will not marry you." Lady Harwood snapped her fan shut. "You speak as if consent were a luxury in your position. You have no dowry, no protector, and if Mr. Fenwick's preliminary review is correct, no claim to financial innocence either." There it was, set down as casually as a teacup. Catherine did not move. "If there are questions in the books, I will answer them." "Of course you will," Lady Harwood said. "To the proper authorities, if required, unless this matter is resolved privately first." Mr. Bellamy stepped closer, port on his breath. "No need for unpleasantness, miss. You'll have my name, my house, decent meals. Better than scratching ink till your eyes fail." "Better than prison," said the room without speaking. Catherine turned to Lady Harwood. "When did my father's accounts become bargaining chips for your card table?" A flush rose under Lady Harwood's powder. "Take care." "No," Catherine said softly. "I think I have taken care long enough." For one flashing second she thought Lady Harwood might strike her. Instead her stepmother smiled, a bright social smile fit for assemblies and funerals. "You are overwrought. Go to your room. Mr. Fenwick will collect the office keys." Catherine did not hand them over until Fenwick came himself, palm outstretched and expression pained, as if duty cost him sleep. "Only temporary, miss," he murmured. "Temporary," she repeated, and placed the keys in his hand one by one. By noon the servants knew she had been barred from the books. By 1, 2 maids stopped speaking when she entered a passage. By 2, a footman she had once taught to write his name would not meet her eye. At 3 she saw the Duke again. He crossed the lower hall with Fenwick at his shoulder, asking in that measured voice to inspect estate storage ledgers for the last 2 years. Fenwick bowed and lied smoothly that several volumes were under reconciliation and unavailable until evening. The Duke's gaze shifted, found Catherine at the end of the corridor and held for a beat before courtesy pulled him onward. She stepped after him, but Miss Tripp moved into her path, carrying folded napkins she did not need to carry. "Not now," Tripp said sweetly. "His Grace has no wish to be importuned." Catherine went still, then turned away before anger made a spectacle of her. That evening, after supper, she waited in the dark angle, beneath the back stair where the service passage met the courtyard door. The air smelled of damp stone and horse. At last, the Duke emerged alone from the side study, gloves in hand, heading toward the stables where his carriage waited. "Your Grace." He stopped. In lantern light, his face looked carved and tired. "Miss Larson." "I need 5 minutes. Without Mr. Fenwick. Without Lady Harwood." A pause, then, "You have 2. She almost laughed at the absurd precision of it. "Lady Harwood and the steward are altering the estate books. They intend to accuse me of embezzlement and force a marriage to Mr. Bellamy before any magistrate will hear me." He regarded her without visible reaction. "That is a grave allegation." "It is also true." "On what evidence?" "Fresh ink where old entries should be, withdrawals that do not match tenant receipts, grain payments recorded twice, labour wages once, and now I am denied access to the office." "Circumstantial," he said, "and convenient, from a woman recently connected to a fugitive lord." The words landed like cold water. She felt the sting, then steadied. "You think I invent this to save myself?" "I think," he said, "that panic often dresses itself as certainty." Catherine took 1 step closer, forgetting caution, then examined the mill books at Northfield against the household ledgers. Compare granary tallies signed by the foreman with Fenwick's quarterly abstracts. Ask why Crown contract deliveries rose on paper while tenant rations fell in March. Something sharpened in his expression. "You know contract figures?" "I kept them," she said, "until this morning." Behind them, the yard gate creaked. Voices approached. The Duke stepped back into formality, as if a door had closed inside him. "I will look into it." "That is not enough." "It is what you are getting tonight." He inclined his head and walked on, leaving Catherine in the passage with damp creeping through her slippers and fury burning clean through her fear. By dawn the next day, things were worse. Mr. Fenwick announced at breakfast, within hearing of half the household, that irregularities had indeed been found in the office books, and that, for Miss Larson's own peace of mind, her correspondence and room would be reviewed to recover missing documents. The phrase was so polished it almost sounded kind. They searched while she stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind her back so no one saw them tremble. Miss Tripp lifted folded chemises with 2 fingers, sneering at their mending. A housemaid opened Catherine's writing box and held up old French exercise papers as if they were contraband. Fenwick examined her father's pocket watch, then set it down with deliberate care. They found nothing of use. No money, no altered pages, no secret letters. Yet the absence seemed only to irritate Lady Harwood further. "Clever girls hide things where men do not think to look," she said from the hall. Catherine met her gaze. "Clever women accuse where men prefer not to think at all." Lady Harwood's eyes flashed. "You will regret that." By midday, a message went out in Lady Harwood's hand, inviting select neighbours to dine 2 nights hence on a happy domestic matter. Engagement announcement. Public pressure. If Catherine refused before witnesses, she would appear unstable and ungrateful. If she acquiesced, she was trapped. She made one more attempt to reach the Duke through proper channels. Fenwick returned with the reply that His Grace had left the house for county business and would not receive calls. Catherine did not believe it, but disbelief changed nothing. So she did what she had been taught never to do. She entered the estate office without permission, not by force, by memory. The old side door from the disused schoolroom still stuck in humid weather, unless lifted an inch before the latch turned. As a child she had hidden there during long dinners, reading discarded almanacs while her father worked. At dusk she slipped through with a single taper shielded in her palm. The shelves smelled of leather, dust, and sealing wax. Ledger volumes sat in their accustomed order, but 2 were missing from the middle tier: household disbursements and contract receipts. She searched drawers, then the locking chest beneath the desk. Locked. She knelt and slid her fingers under the chest. A paper edge scraped her knuckle. She drew out a folded sheet half-trapped beneath one leg, an account summary in the steward's hand, totals revised in darker ink, margin note, transfer discrepancy to KL petty cash, not yet sanded dry. KL. Her stomach dropped, then hardened. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. She blew out the taper, pressed into shadow behind the screen, and watched Fenwick enter with the steward. In darkness, their voices carried clear. "Bellamy wants the settlement signed before Sunday," Fenwick muttered. "Then make her sign," the steward answered, "or have the constable call tomorrow. Theft charges will cool her temper." "And if Wexford interferes?" A pause. Paper rustled. "He won't," said the steward. "His brother brought him trouble enough. He thanked the girl, offered coin, and she refused like a fool. Pride without power is useful. Let her talk." Fenwick gave a soft, humourless laugh. "Lady Harwood says she can cry madness if needed." "Then let her cry." They moved to the desk. Catherine heard pen scratch, page turn, wax drip. Her pulse beat so loudly she feared they must hear it. At last they left, locking the door behind them. She waited until the house clock struck 9 before daring to breathe deeply. When she emerged, her skirts were streaked with dust and her knees ached, but the folded sheet was hidden inside her sleeve. In her room she spread it beneath candlelight. Not proof enough for court, perhaps, but proof enough that her instincts were not hysteria. She needed an ally with rank, access, and reason to care. She needed the man who had looked at her like a witness and a suspect in the same breath. Near midnight, as she debated whether to risk the stables again, a knock sounded, 3 precise taps, on her door. She opened it to find not Fenwick, not Tripp, but the Duke of Wexford. He stood alone in the narrow passage, coat unbuttoned, hair wind-tossed from riding. In one hand he held a packet tied in military twine, in the other a lantern half-shielded. "May I come in?" he asked. Catherine stepped aside. He entered, glanced once around the bare room, the washstand, the mended shawl, the stack of account papers no one had bothered to confiscate, and set the lantern on her table. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." She folded her arms. "For which part?" A breath, almost a sigh. "For assuming your warning was panic. For offering money as if discretion could be purchased from you, and for not telling you immediately what my brother actually brought me." He placed the twine packet on the table and untied it. Inside lay letters, some crested, some plain, and 2 narrow books bound in cracked calfskin. Even before he opened one, Catherine recognised the columns: crown grain contracts, district allocations, delivery confirmations. Adrian did not fall into your orangery by accident, the Duke said. "He was carrying these from London to me. He had intercepted correspondence between your stepmother's steward and a broker in Portsmouth. Arrangements to divert government grain shipments through private warehouses. Then bill shortages as storm loss and tenant arrears." Catherine stared at the page. Names, dates, figures she knew by shape if not by sight. He continued, voice clipped by contained anger. "There are also letters referencing forged debt instruments against your late father's estate. Debts manufactured after his death, secured against property portions that should have reverted to you under the original settlement." The room seemed to tilt, as if the floorboards had loosened beneath her. "My father kept no such debts," she said. "I know. I had copies checked tonight against county filings. Signatures were traced, witness seals duplicated, crude work, if one looks closely. No one bothered to look." A quiet broke between them, dense and fierce. Catherine touched one letter with 2 fingers. "Why tell me now?" His mouth tightened. "Because if these go forward without corroboration from inside this house, Lady Harwood's solicitor will call them stolen fabrications, delivered by a reckless younger son with a taste for drama. He will say you seduced, hid, and coached that son to revenge a private insult. Society will prefer that story. It is cleaner." She almost smiled at the precision of his cynicism. "And my testimony is not clean." "No," he said, "but your hand is meticulous, your memory better than most clerks', and your knowledge of these books predates the fraud. With properly copied ledgers and matched receipts, we can move this from rumour to admissible evidence." He looked at her directly then, without the insulating frost she had first met. "I am asking for your help, Miss Larson, openly, not as charity, not as payment for a debt, as the only way to make this hold." Catherine thought of Bellamy's damp fingers, of Tripp overturning her drawers, of Fenwick deciding which future she deserved, of her father's voice over a ledger. Never turn away from figures. Outside, wind pressed once against the window and passed. She reached into her sleeve, withdrew the folded sheet she had taken from the office chest, and handed it to him. "I have begun," she said. He scanned the margin note, and the first unguarded expression she had seen on him crossed his face, grim approval edged with fury. "Good," he said softly. Catherine straightened, feeling something settle into place inside her. Not safety, not yet, but direction. "Then hear me clearly, Your Grace. I will not be hidden while men arrange this above my head. If we proceed in daylight. Before magistrate, neighbours, whoever must hear. I will copy every altered page in my own hand and stand by it publicly." For a heartbeat he was silent. Then he inclined his head, not as one humouring an inferior, but as one acknowledging terms. "Agreed." The word rang through the small room like a struck bell. From below came the distant creak of boards. Someone moving in the corridor, perhaps, or only the house settling around its secrets. The Duke retied the packet, leaving half the letters with her and taking half himself. "Lock your door," he said. "At dawn I send for Bow Street men, and a magistrate I trust. Until then, trust no message not sealed by me or Adrian." "Adrian is safe?" A flicker of warmth, brief as candle flare. "Annoyingly alive." Despite everything, Catherine exhaled a breath that was almost laughter. When he reached the door, he paused. "You were right about one thing in the passage yesterday." "Only one." His mouth moved, not quite a smile. Risk was already present. Then he was gone into the dark hall, and Catherine stood amid letters that could ruin a house and restore a name, knowing by the steadiness of her own hands that silence had ended. Catherine stood for a long moment after the Duke's footsteps faded, listening to the old house breathe around her. A board creaked in the passage, then settled. Wind scraped a branch against the pane. She did not trust quiet any more. She moved quickly. Half the letters he had left she wrapped in oilcloth torn from an old cloak lining and slid beneath the loose hearth brick behind her washstand. The 2 contract books she could not hide so easily. She stripped the ticking from her mattress, laid them flat between straw and sacking, and stitched the seam closed with shaking but competent hands. The steward's incriminating summary she tucked inside her sleeve again. By the time grey dawn began to thin the darkness, her fingers were pricked and raw. At first bell they came, not a maid with hot water. Lady Harwood herself, in a morning wrapper the colour of cream, with Miss Tripp and Mr. Fenwick behind her like witnesses to an execution. "My dear Catherine," Lady Harwood said brightly, not crossing the threshold, "I am told you were wandering the house very late. You look feverish. For everyone's comfort you will remain in your room today." Catherine kept one hand on the door. "And I have work in the office." "Not any more." Fenwick held up a ring of keys. Hers were gone, replaced overnight. Miss Tripp brushed past Catherine before she could block her, lifting lids and opening drawers with the proprietary air of a woman inspecting damaged goods. "You have no right." "On the contrary," Lady Harwood said. "Given the irregularities in household accounts and your agitated state, I have every right to protect this family from further confusion." Tripp turned up nothing useful in the chest or writing box. She tugged at the mattress corner once, frowned at the fresh seam, and then mercifully dismissed it as poor mending. Down in the drive, wheels ground over gravel. A rider called out. Catherine turned toward the window just in time to see a livery courier dismount with a sealed note. Fenwick stepped into the hall, received it, glanced at the seal and slid it into his coat without bringing it to her. The Duke's seal. Intercepted. Lady Harwood followed Catherine's gaze and smiled faintly. "No visitors today. You will rest. Mr. Bellamy dines with us tonight. We shall settle your future like civilized people." When they left, Fenwick locked the door from the outside. Catherine stood very still, rage rising hot and clean. She waited 5 minutes, then went to the adjoining dressing closet, climbed onto a chair, and pressed at the cracked panel her father had once shown her as a child hiding place. The wood gave. Behind it, a narrow servant run, black with soot, led toward the old nursery stairs. By 9 she was in the passage outside the estate office, dust in her hair and splinters in her palms. Through the cracked door she heard Fenwick and the steward arguing. "We move all primary ledgers now," the steward hissed. "Kitchen, boiler, room. If he asks to inspect, we produce extracts." "Destroying records in this house? Would you prefer prison?" Catherine's breath caught. She slipped back before they opened the door. From the upper landing she watched 2 footmen carry bound ledger volumes, wrapped in sailcloth toward the rear service wing. Too many volumes too quickly, and none logged for transport. In the courtyard, Lady Harwood stood with Bellamy beneath a parasol, laughing at something he said while smoke already began to thread from the boiler chimney in thicker, darker bands than ordinary laundry firing. If those books burned, figures became rumour. Rumour could be buried. At noon, despite her confinement, Catherine forced her way into the corridor when a maid brought broth. Lady Harwood met her halfway, all satin civility over iron intent. "You are making a spectacle," her stepmother said softly. "Do go back inside before I must call the constable." "You are burning estate records." "I am clearing mouldy rubbish," a tilt of the head, "and preserving what matters." "What matters to you is debt and appearances." "What matters?" Lady Harwood snapped, mask slipping. is that I will not be ruined by a girl who mistakes neat handwriting for power." Catherine stepped close enough that only Lady Harwood could hear. "If you destroy those ledgers, tenant families lose grain allotments they are owed, widows lose fuel credits, children lose winter bread." Lady Harwood's eyes went cold. "Children do not dine with magistrates, men do. Learn that, if you can learn nothing else." She signalled Trip. The maid took Catherine's arm hard enough to bruise and marched her back to the locked room. By late afternoon, the whole house smelled faintly of scorched glue and wet ash. The Duke arrived before dusk, with a county magistrate's clerk and 2 men in plain coats who moved like soldiers attempting to look ordinary. Catherine saw them from her window and nearly shouted with relief. 10 minutes later, Fenwick unlocked her door. Face pale but composed. "You are requested in the library." Requested as if she had been free to decline anything today. In the library, the Duke stood by the desk, jaw tight, gloves tucked in one hand. Beside him, the clerk sorted papers. Lady Harwood occupied the chaise in widow-like elegance. Bellamy leaned at the mantel, smug. "Miss Larson," the clerk began, "we are conducting a preliminary inquiry into discrepancies alleged in estate and contract accounts. His Grace indicates you can identify original books." "I can," Catherine said. "Then perhaps you will explain," Lady Harwood cut in, pressing lace to her lips, "why those same books were found damaged after Miss Larson was discovered wandering unchaperoned near the boiler rooms before dawn." Catherine stared. "That is a lie." Fenwick cleared his throat sadly. "I regret to confirm, miss, you were absent from your room." "Because you locked me in it." The Duke's gaze snapped to Fenwick. Fenwick dropped his eyes. The clerk shifted uneasily. "Let us proceed to the records." They went to the service wing. The boiler room door stood open. Inside, on damp stone, lay a blackened ruin of ledgers, warped covers, half-charred gatherings. Ink bled into illegible swamps. Not all had burned completely. Enough remained to prove destruction, not accident. Catherine knelt and lifted a fragment. Across the top, in her own unmistakable hand from years ago, "Household Disbursements, Michaelmas Quarter." Beneath it, scorched but visible, someone had newly penned "K.L. Petty Cash Adjustment" in darker ink, the same phrase as the stolen summary. Planted, deliberate. The clerk looked stricken. "Good God!" Lady Harwood dabbed at dry eyes. "I have defended this poor child for years. Her nerves have been unreliable since her father died. I feared strain might unseat her, but this—" Bellamy made a tutting noise. "Best handled privately, eh? Family matter." The Duke spoke at last, quiet and lethal. "No one speak to me of privacy while evidence smoulders at my feet." Yet even he could not conjure intact books from ash. Back in the library, Catherine asked for her room to be searched for the packet of letters he had left. She knew, with a sick certainty, what they would find. Nothing. The hearth brick had been pried up, the oilcloth gone, the mattress slit and crudely re-sewn. The contract books vanished. Trip swore she had seen no one enter. Fenwick looked sorrowful. Lady Harwood looked vindicated. Catherine felt the floor tilt under her. The Duke turned to her, voice low. "Did you move them?" "No." "Tell me exactly." "I hid them before dawn. They were there." She hated how desperate she sounded and forced herself steady. "Someone watched. Someone waited." The clerk, caught between rank and procedure, shuffled his notes. "Without originals and with these circumstances, I cannot authorize seizure tonight. I can record statements, secure what remains, and request formal warrants pending magistrate review." "Pending? Delay? Time for lies to harden." Lady Harwood rose gracefully. In the meantime, for everyone's safety, I believe Miss Larson should be under close supervision. She is plainly distressed." "Do not put me in her care," Catherine said to the clerk. "Please." He looked at the Duke, then away. "I have no authority to remove her absent charge or guardian petition." "I petition as head of this house," Lady Harwood said smoothly. Bellamy added, "and as future husband I'll see to her comforts." Catherine's stomach turned. "I have not agreed." Lady Harwood's smile glittered. "Your agreement is a matter for calmer hours." The Duke's expression was unreadable, but when Catherine passed him in the hall, he said, so low only she could hear, "Do not sign anything. Burn anything you are forced to write." Then he left with the clerk and the plain-coated men into gathering rain, and for the first time since the orangery, Catherine felt fear with no immediate counterweight. That night her door was locked again, this time from both sides. She did not cry until she was sure no one could hear. Wexford rode hard enough to lame a lesser horse, and did not feel the rain until he reached the coaching-inn stables and slid from the saddle with his knees nearly buckling. He had failed at restraint, failed at timing, failed at the one thing he had trained himself to do since inheriting a title at 24. Anticipate disaster before disaster anticipated him. Inside the inn's private parlour, Adrian stood at the window in shirt sleeves, a bandage still visible above his collar where fever had thinned him. He turned at the door, read Wexford's face once, and set down his glass untouched. "She's in danger," Wexford said without preamble. Adrian's mouth flattened. "You should have led with that yesterday." "I should have done many things yesterday." He stripped off wet gloves and braced both palms on the table. Between them lay copies salvaged from county filings, 2 sworn statements from a Portsmouth dock clerk now suddenly unavailable, and the clerk's infuriating note, insufficient for immediate action. Adrian watched him for a long beat. "Say it plain, Nicholas." Wexford almost flinched at his given name. Adrian used it only when anger or concern overrode formality. "I mistrusted her when she told the truth," Wexford said. The words felt like confession and indictment both. "I arrived ready to compensate inconvenience, not to listen. By the time I listened, Harwood had burned half the trail. And the other half? Stolen from her room under my seal." Adrian swore softly. "That part is on me." "It is not." "It is," Adrian snapped. "I was followed from London. I brought this to her door." Wexford closed his eyes briefly. In memory, he saw again another door, another year. His father's study, after debts, broke into public scandal. Creditors in the hall. His mother weeping prettily while servants packed silver to hide it. He had learned then that sentiment was a luxury, and trust a hole in the hull. Control, distance, precision. Those had kept the dukedom afloat, and yet precision had not kept Catherine safe in a locked room while men discussed her mind as if it were property. "She looked at me tonight," he said quietly, as if deciding whether I was merely a better-dressed version of every man who had ever traded her future without asking. Adrian's voice softened. "And are you?" The question landed clean. "No," Wexford said after a moment, "or I do not wish to be. I do not know when wishing became relevant." Adrian gave a tired, crooked half-smile. "Since you started saying her name when you think no one hears." Wexford ignored that with effort. "Harwood will force a public declaration quickly, marriage or madness, whichever secures her. If Catherine is removed to a private house under medical pretext, we may not reach her before signatures are witnessed and credibility buried." Adrian moved to the table. "Then we don't let her disappear. We drag this into the largest room in Hampshire. "The Midsummer Assembly," Wexford said. "Half the county present. No one can claim private misunderstanding in front of 300 witnesses. Can you get warrants in time? Not full indictments, entry and detention on probable fraud if I can produce one unimpeachable witness and one surviving original." Adrian tapped a folded sheet. "I have a witness. Sergeant Hale saw me take the letters from the broker. He hates aristocrats and loves oath-taking. As for originals, Harwood can burn books, but she can't burn the Crown's duplicates in London. I sent for certified abstracts yesterday. They arrive by noon if the roads hold." Wexford exhaled, the first full breath in hours. Adrian's expression gentled. "You look wrecked." "I am tired," Wexford said. "Not what I meant." Rain rattled the window. Wexford stared at the dark pane and spoke because not speaking had nearly cost too much already. "I am afraid," he said, "not of scandal, of being 1 hour too late again." Adrian said nothing for a moment, then, very quietly, "You were too late for father because no one could save him from himself. You were too late for mother because she never wanted saving. This is not that." Wexford nodded once, sharp. "See that I remember it." By morning, Lady Harwood's final move arrived dressed as Concern. Dr. Pike, a village physician who owed Bellamy money, visited Catherine's room with smelling salts and grave murmurs. He asked whether she slept, whether she heard voices, whether she felt persecuted. When she refused to answer, he wrote anyway. At noon, Fenwick delivered a paper for her signature acknowledging temporary restorative residence in Bath under Lady Harwood's supervision. Catherine laughed once without humour. A private exile with a diagnosis. "For your health, miss." For her convenience. She refused to sign. Fenwick looked genuinely uneasy. "Then they may proceed without consent under household guardianship." By 3, trunks were being packed in the corridor. At 4, Miss Tripp laid out a pale dress Catherine had not worn since morning. "You are to attend the Midsummer Assembly first," she said. "Lady Harwood will announce your understanding with Mr. Bellamy. Afterward you travel at dawn for rest." Understanding, rest, words that meant cage. Catherine sat before the looking-glass while Tripp pinned her hair too tightly and thought, with almost detached clarity, that she had never been closer to vanishing. No books, no letters, a physician's note, a coerced engagement in public. Once branded unstable, every truth she spoke would sound like resentment. As Tripp fastened the last hook, a scullery girl slipped in with a tray and kept her eyes down. Beneath the napkin by the teacup lay a folded scrap sealed with plain wax. Catherine palmed it unseen and waited until Tripp stepped out to fetch gloves. The note contained 4 words in the Duke's hard, unmistakable hand. "Hold until the 9th dance." No explanation, no promise, only a time. Her pulse hammered. The 9th dance would be near 11 when supper was finished and attention wandered, late enough for arrivals from London if roads were clear, too late if they were not. She burned the note in the candle and rubbed ash into her palm. Downstairs, Lady Harwood greeted guests in silver gauze, all maternal radiance. Bellamy beamed like a man already congratulated. Music rose from the assembly rooms across the village green, fiddles bright over the murmur of summer voices and fan feathers and polished shoes. When they entered, heads turned. Catherine felt each glance as a touch, curiosity, pity, appetite for spectacle. Lady Harwood kept one hand at her elbow, steering. Bellamy took her other arm when introductions thickened, fingers clamping possessively over silk. "Smile," he muttered. "No one likes a sulking bride." At the edge of the dance floor, the master of ceremonies struck his cane for attention. Lady Harwood lifted her fan, preparing to speak. Catherine scanned the room once. Fast. No Duke, no Adrian, no plain-coated officers, only county faces, avid and waiting. Outside, somewhere beyond the open windows, thunder rolled low over Hampshire fields. Outside the open windows, thunder rolled low over the Hampshire fields. Inside the assembly rooms, the master of ceremonies tapped his cane again for silence, smiling the fixed smile of a man who sensed drama and hoped it would remain decorous. Lady Harwood rose in a wash of silver gauze, one gloved hand on Catherine's arm, the other lifting her fan like a benediction. "My dear friends," she began, voice warm with performance, "it gives me profound happiness to announce a domestic understanding." Catherine heard her own heartbeat, counted it once, and stepped forward out of Lady Harwood's grip. "I cannot permit that announcement," she said. The room inhaled as one body. Bellamy's fingers clamped around her elbow. "Don't be foolish!" Catherine turned her head, looked directly at him, and removed his hand finger by finger. "Do not touch me again." Lady Harwood's smile did not crack, but her eyes went knife bright. "You are overwrought, child. Sit down." "No," Catherine pitched her voice to Carrie. "I stand accused in this county of theft and instability. Until those accusations are addressed publicly, there will be no engagement." A rustle spread through the room, fans pausing, whispers catching. Lady Harwood gave a soft laugh. "You see, delusions! This is precisely what I have endured in private." Catherine reached into her reticule and drew out a charred ledger fragment, wrapped in clean muslin. She held it up between two fingers. "This was pulled from your boiler room this evening," she said. "In my own hand from 3 years ago. Household disbursements, Michaelmas quarter. It was burned with other books while I was locked in my room." "Absurd," Lady Harwood said crisply. "You were wandering the service wing before dawn." "Because your steward and butler moved records there to destroy them." Bellamy made an impatient sound. "This is vulgar. Harwood, end it." But Catherine had begun counting dances from the moment she arrived. 5th set had passed. 6th, 7th now tuning. She needed time, just time, and so she did what she knew best. She turned not to Lady Harwood, but to the nearest cluster of county wives and land agents. "Mrs. Anstey, your tenant ledgers showed winter fuel credits delayed in March, did they not? Mr. Price, your wagoner said Crown grain wagons were rerouted to Portsmouth storage that same fortnight." Mr. Price blinked. "How in God's name would you know that?" "Because I kept Harwood Estate abstracts, and because the numbers do not lie even when people do." Lady Harwood snapped her fan shut. "You presume very far for a dependent with no standing." "Standing is not arithmetic." A few people laughed, nervously, then with growing appetite. Bellamy flushed deeper. Lady Harwood stepped closer, voice low and venomous under her smile. "You are finished if you continue." Catherine met her gaze. "Then we may finish it properly." The musicians struck up the next set. Couples moved uncertainly, then committed, because society can dance through anything. Catherine felt Lady Harwood's grip return to her sleeve, steering her toward a chair near the wall, as if seating an unruly child. "Smile," Lady Harwood hissed. "If you insist on humiliating yourself, do it prettily." Catherine sat. She watched the dancers wheel. One set, then another. 8th dance. No Duke, no officers. Thunder again, closer now. Bellamy hovered at her shoulder like a creditor at a deathbed. "You've had your tantrum. At the close of this dance," Harwood announces, "you nod, and tomorrow we sign." Catherine looked up at him. "Did you agree to settle her gaming debts in exchange for me?" His eyes narrowed. "Mind yourself." "So, yes." He leaned down, voice thick with threat. Whatever story you think you have, no magistrate will prefer it to mine." She rose before he could block her and crossed to the musicians' dais. The fiddles faltered as she stepped into their line of sight. The room turned, sound thinning to silk whispers and shoe scuffs. "If anyone here doubts my memory," she said clearly, "I invite challenge. March 7th. Crown allotment listed at 240 sacks. Tenant distribution recorded at 162. Difference billed as storm spoilage, though no storm was logged within 10 miles. April 2nd, labour wages halved on paper, while steward commissions doubled. April 19th, debt instrument entered against my father's estate. Witness seal duplicated, not impressed. She did not shake. Years of swallowing words had honed this one blade. Lady Harwood moved forward, all graceful distress. "Listen to this recitation. She has obsessed over columns for years. Now she mistakes fixation for fact." Catherine turned to her. "Then answer one question plainly. If I embezzled funds, where are they?" "In your hidden accounts, no doubt." "Produce them." "You destroyed the books." "You had my rooms searched. Twice." A murmur, sharper this time. Lady Harwood's composure thinned. "No woman with any sense would entrust money to your obvious hiding places. So now I am both incompetent and cunning." The laugh that answered came from 3 corners at once. Lady Harwood's nostrils flared. The clock over the supper doors struck 11. 9th dance. The great front doors opened. Rain-damp air swept in with 3 plain-coated Bow Street men, 2 county constables, and behind them the Duke of Wexford in black evening dress, spattered at the hem from hard riding. At his right walked Adrian Vale in regimentals, pale but upright, a white scar of healing visible at his collar. In the Duke's hand was a leather dispatch case sealed with red wax and the Crown's stamp, half broken. Conversation died so abruptly the final violin note hung naked in the room. The chief officer removed his hat. "By order of Magistrate Ellingford, warrant to seize financial records and detain Mr. Josiah Crane, estate steward, and Mrs. Beatrice Harwood, pending inquiry into fraud, forgery, and destruction of evidence." Lady Harwood laughed aloud. "How theatrical! On whose testimony? This girl's fantasies and a rake's adventure tale?" Adrian's mouth crooked. "I've been called worse than rake, madam." The Duke did not look at his brother. He looked at Catherine first, as if confirming she was still standing. Then he faced the room. "Certified Crown abstracts from London arrived at noon," he said. "They match Miss Larson's figures exactly and contradict Harwood Estate submissions. Sergeant Hale of the Guards is prepared to swear he witnessed my brother recover correspondence from your broker's courier. Chain of custody is documented." He lifted the dispatch case. "And one original survives your fire?" Catherine felt shock flicker through her. One original, then remembered she had stitched Adrian's signet into her petticoat hem, not the letters. But perhaps... Adrian reached into his coat and produced a flat, oil-dark parcel. "Your maid searched your mattress well," he drawled. "Less well the nursery cistern where I hid a duplicate packet the night I left. Habit of mine, distrust." Catherine exhaled, almost dizzy. Lady Harwood recovered fastest. She pointed at Catherine with a trembling fan. "Of course! She colluded with him from the first. She hid him, lied to constables, plotted to ruin me and trap a duke." "I hid an injured man from guards who would have shot first and sorted titles lady," Catherine said. "And I lied because I knew exactly what you would do with truth. You conniving little nobody." The words cracked across the room. The Duke stepped to Catherine's side, close enough that no one could mistake it, and spoke without raising his voice. "That Nobody has more honour than anyone in this room who watched her, slandered, and called it propriety. Lady Harwood rounded on him. You choose her? A dependent scribbler? I choose evidence, he said, and I stand with Miss Larson. The officers moved toward the supper corridor where the steward had gone pale against the panelling. But Lady Harwood was not done. Fenwick, she snapped, tell them she was absent from her room. Tell them she raved. Fenwick swallowed, eyes darting between faces. I reported what I observed. Catherine stepped forward. Then observe this now, Mr. Fenwick. At dawn yesterday you intercepted a sealed courier bearing his Grace's crest and did not deliver it. Who gave you that instruction? Fenwick's mouth opened, closed. From the refreshment table, a small voice quavered, He gave it to Miss Tripp, miss. I saw. Heads turned. The speaker was Lucy, the scullery girl, still in apron and borrowed cap, clutching a tray with both hands. Lady Harwood snapped, Be silent. Lucy flinched but held her ground. Beg pardon, ma'am. It were true. Catherine did not look at Lucy. She kept her eyes on Fenwick. Who ordered my door locked? Fenwick's face crumpled into a weary, frightened honesty. My lady did. Who moved the ledgers to the boiler room? He shut his eyes. Mr. Crane, on her order. Lady Harwood made a sound between fury and disbelief. Coward! The chief officer nodded to a constable, who took Fenwick gently but firmly by the arm. Bellamy stepped in at last, blustering. You cannot arrest a lady on servants' gossip. Catherine turned on him with sudden icy clarity. And did you or did you not agree to settle Lady Harwood's notes in exchange for a marriage contract signed under household guardianship? Bellamy sputtered. Private arrangement. Thank you, she said. Laughter, outright now, then hisses. Lady Harwood saw the room turning and lunged, not at Catherine, but at Adrian's oilskin parcel. Her glove caught the edge. Papers spilled white across the floorboards like startled birds. She dropped to snatch them. Catherine dropped too, faster, gathering sheets to her chest, while Lady Harwood clawed for one marked with crown seal. Give me that! No! Lady Harwood grabbed Catherine's wrist hard enough to grind bone. Catherine twisted, using the same practical force she had once used to drag a bleeding man through a narrow passage. Lady Harwood lost balance on her own hem and fell sideways against a chair. Gasps! Someone cried out. Officers closed in. As they lifted Lady Harwood, she screamed, all polish gone. She is nothing! Do you hear me? Nothing! She'll be discarded the moment she ceases to amuse you. Catherine stood, breathing hard, papers held steady. Perhaps, she said, but tonight I am believed. Lady Harwood went still at that, as if struck where no fan or fortune could shield her. The officers escorted her and the steward through the parted crowd into rain and carriage lamps. Fenwick followed, ashen. Bellamy, abandoned by momentum, retreated toward the side door amid muttered contempt. Dr. Pike vanished before anyone could ask him a question. When the doors shut, the room seemed to sway with released tension. Conversations started all at once, then broke, reforming around new hierarchies. Catherine's hands began to shake only then. Adrian appeared at her elbow, offering a handkerchief with absurd ceremony. For ink, blood, tears, or victory, dealer's choice. She took it and laughed once, breathless. You hid duplicates in a nursery cistern? I never trust a single pocket, he said. Family trait. Her gaze found the Duke across the scattered papers and staring guests. He had not moved far, as if unwilling to crowd her and unwilling to leave. Rain ticked at the windows. The musicians, forgotten, held their instruments in awkward silence. He crossed to her slowly. Miss Larson, he said, formal in words and entirely unformal in his eyes. Are you able to continue? With what? With whatever you choose next. The simplicity of it hit harder than any grand declaration. Choice! Catherine looked around the room that had expected her quiet ruin, and had instead witnessed her refusal. Then she handed the packet to the chief officer and said, "I choose to give my statement now, while everyone's memory is inconveniently fresh." The statement ran past midnight in a side chamber that smelled of candle grease and wet wool. Magistrate Ellingford arrived in person, hair unpowdered and temper sharp at being roused, then sharpened further when he read the Crown abstracts and Catherine's recited dates aligned down to the sack and shilling. Adrian testified seated, one hand braced against his healing side, grin absent for once. Lucy whispered her account and cried when finished. Fenwick, cornered by documentary fact and his own exhaustion, confirmed the locked door, the intercepted note, and the boiler room transfer. By 2 a.m, warrants expanded from detention to formal charges. Lady Harwood would be removed under supervision to Bath pending trial disposition. Crane to jail in Winchester. Bellamy, though not indictable on the central fraud, was named in debt coercion affidavits that would stain him thoroughly. When Catherine stepped into the corridor at last, dawn had not yet broken, but the storm had passed. The air through the open transom smelled of rain-washed stone and crushed mint from the assembly garden. She leaned against the wall, suddenly, violently tired. "You did not eat," the Duke said behind her. Neither had she heard him approach nor asked him to. "I cannot imagine swallowing anything tonight." He held out a small cup, anyway. Tea gone lukewarm. She took it because refusing every offered kindness had become another form of armour, and she was too tired to wear it. For a minute they stood in silence, then she said, "I kept waiting for someone to call it improper and send me away." He gave a humourless breath. Several attempted. The magistrate discovered he preferred numbers to outrage. Catherine stared into the tea. When she said I was nothing, I nearly believed her again. "You were never nothing." She looked up, and this time there was no distance in him at all, only fatigue and fierce, careful attention. "I know," she said after a moment. "Now I know." Adrian limped into the corridor then, one hand on the jamb. "If this is the solemn reconciliation scene, kindly postpone. I am held together by linen and spite and need a bed." Catherine smiled, despite herself. "Go, my lord." He wagged a finger. "After you stop calling me my lord when I've bled on your nursery floorboards." "Good night, Adrian." "Good morning, I think." He tipped an imaginary hat to his brother. "Nicholas, try not to interrogate anyone before breakfast." When he had gone, the Duke and Catherine walked out to the assembly steps where the sky was paling behind low clouds. Carriages waited, servants dozed on boxes. Hampshire, after scandal, looked indecently ordinary. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Not back to Lady Harwood's wing. The magistrate has ordered rooms prepared at the rectory until the property inventory is complete." "I can have no arrangements made over my head," she said, not unkindly. A pause, then, "Understood." She set her empty cup on the step. "I am very tired, Your Grace, and very angry, and I do not yet know what to do with either." "Both are reasonable." She glanced at him, surprised into a short laugh. "You make reasons sound like permission." "Perhaps it is." The rector's carriage rolled forward. Catherine put one foot on the step, then turned back. "For what it is worth," she said, "I am glad you were not 1 hour too late." He went very still. "So am I." September laid gold along the hedgerows and dust in the lane to the old tithe barn Catherine had claimed for the tenants' schoolroom. Carpenters were still fitting benches. The smell of fresh-cut pine and lime wash sat bright in the air. Children clustered at the doorway, whispering and shoving each other, half curious and half terrified of slates. Catherine stood at a long table with ink on her fingers, reviewing the mason's invoice against delivered stone counts. Across from her, the Duke watched with an expression she had come to recognise as admiration tempered by caution, as if he still expected to be sent away, if he presumed too much. Adrian sprawled on an upturned crate near the window, ostensibly supervising, actually teaching 3 boys how to shuffle cards badly. "Cheating is an advanced lesson," Catherine called without looking up. "I prefer practical mathematics," Adrian replied. The Duke cleared his throat. "Could I have a word? Outside?" Catherine capped her ink, handed the invoice to Mrs. Dobbs for filing, and followed him into the yard where late bees worried the last lavender spikes. He did not begin at once. That alone told her this mattered. "The settlement order came this morning," he said. "Your father's corrected estate portion is entered. Modest but clear title, cottage rights, 2 income fields, and independent control of accounts as requested." "As requested," she repeated softly. She had fought for each clause before 3 solicitors and 1 offended cousin. "I also have," he held out a folded legal packet, "the schoolroom trust in your name, funded for 5 years, renewable without my signature." She took it, scanned the first lines, then looked up. "You have done exactly what I asked." "Yes." "And you are waiting for the part where I say thank you and agree to be managed graciously." "No." He met her gaze, no flinch, no frost. "I'm waiting for permission to speak plainly." She nodded once. He exhaled, as if stepping off a ledge by choice. "I have spent most of my life mistaking control for safety. It kept estates solvent and people at a distance, and I called that virtue. Then you refused my purse, challenged my conclusions, and stood in a crowded room while I was still learning how to stand beside anyone at all." His mouth tightened. He looked briefly away toward the barn, where children were now shrieking at Adrian's card tricks. "I was wrong about you, and not only at first. Even after I believed you, part of me believed I could fix matters for you if I moved quickly enough. You made it very clear you are not a matter to be fixed." Catherine's throat tightened unexpectedly. No, he agreed. "You are the woman I think of before I sleep and when I wake. The woman whose mind I trust more than my own caution. The woman I love." He said the last word without ornament, and it landed with more force for that. "If you will have me, I ask you to marry me, not as rescue, as partnership, with terms written, witnessed, and enforceable, because promises should survive mood." She stared at him, legal packet in one hand, autumn wind lifting loose strands of her dark hair. "Do you know," she said quietly, "how long I have waited to hear a man of rank use the word love as if it were accountable?" A faint, startled smile touched his mouth. "Accountability appears to be your preferred language." "It is one of them." She stepped closer. "I do love you, Nicholas." He closed his eyes briefly at his given name on her voice. "But," she went on, and his eyes opened with a flash of rueful expectation, "I will keep my own accounts. I will run this schoolroom. If we disagree, we do so in private and in truth, not through instructions to servants. And if ever you offer me money to make me disappear, I will spend it all on Latin primers, out of spite." This time he laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised and young. "Agreed on all points, including the primers." She held out her hand. "Then yes." He took her hand, then paused, searching her face. "May I kiss you?" "Finally," she said, and rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Behind them, Adrian whooped from the doorway, children erupting into delighted scandal, until Mrs. Dobbs shooed them back inside with theatrical outrage. When they broke apart, the Duke touched his forehead lightly to hers. "Thank you. For what?" "For not mistaking my first version for my final one." In November, rain turned Bath roads to grey paste as Lady Harwood's carriage rolled through under legal escort, curtains drawn against recognition. She did not look out when Catherine stood on the inn step beside Magistrate Ellingford to witness transfer papers. Her chin remained high, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap, betrayed the tremor she would never acknowledge. Crane was less composed at Winchester Jail, railing until he saw the signed sentence and then sagging as if someone had cut his strings. Dr. Pike submitted a statement recanting nervous derangement language under threat of censure. Bellamy retreated to a cousin's house in Dorset after 2 creditors called in notes on the same day. Fenwick, spared prison for full cooperation, took a clerk post in Portsmouth and wrote once to Catherine asking forgiveness. She sent back a brief reply. "I hope you choose honesty earlier in your next life than you did in mine." December brought hard frost and a sky clear as hammered tin. On the morning of her wedding, Catherine stood in the rectory parlour while Mrs. Dobbs fastened pearl buttons at her cuffs and muttered about draughts. The dress was simple ivory wool, warmed with her mother's old lace at the throat. No Duchess glitter, no procession of titled women, just parish bells and breath turning white in air. At the church porch, Adrian waited with 2 small boys from the schoolroom, tasked with guarding the ring and taking the duty with military seriousness. "If either child drops this," Adrian whispered as Catherine passed, "I shall resign my commission from life." Inside, the Duke stood by the altar, grave as ever, though his eyes softened when she reached him in a way no congregation could miss. They spoke their vows without flourish. When asked to obey, Catherine answered the revised language they had negotiated with the rector and each other: to love, honour, and keep faith. The Duke's "I will" was steady enough to hold weight. Afterward, they did not host a grand breakfast. They crossed the green to the schoolroom where tenants crowded benches and children had hung crooked paper garlands between rafters. Catherine signed the first winter provisions ledger at the teacher's desk, while the Duke, now her husband, signed beneath as witness, not overseer. By dusk, most guests had gone. Snow began in sparse, dry flakes. In the little office off the schoolroom, the fire had burned low. Catherine rose automatically to fetch the coal scuttle from beside the door. It was half full, awkward, black dust gritting at the handle. A year ago, her wrists would have shaken from exhaustion and dread. Now, when she lifted it, another hand closed over the opposite side. Nicholas, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, expression solemnly practical. "We can both carry it," he said. From the hall came children's laughter and Adrian arguing with Mrs. Dobbs about whether ginger biscuits counted as supper. The room smelled of ink, coal, and new pine. Catherine adjusted her grip, steady and sure, and together they carried the coal up the back stair.